Okay, hi everybody. I'm Mark Hendrickson. I'm a senior fellow for economic and social policy with the Institute for Faith and Freedom. Used to teach at Grove City College, mostly economics. I was in a few other departments from time to time too. This is lecture one in a series of lectures, and I'm going to tell you about the genesis and history of economics. Let's just start at the beginning, and I'll try to acquaint you with some of the milestones along the way in the development of economics as its own academic discipline. Most of these stories start with the ancient Greeks, and this is no exception. The Greeks, of course, are known for their philosophy, and there were 4 or 5 major branches of philosophy. There was metaphysics, which is the study of the real, ethics, which is the study of the good and not so good, epistemology, which is the study of how we know what we know or think we know. And then there was political economy, which is kind of a grab bag for just the affairs of this world: government, law, trade, commerce, production. The word economics itself comes from a Greek word referring to household management, but it was a very large, kind of open-ended sort of discipline. And then some people would say that the 5th branch of philosophy for the Greeks was aesthetics, the study of the beautiful. Other people say, it doesn't deserve a branch of its own, whatever. So political economy, okay. Nothing really emerged of significance for many centuries in there. There was a flurry of activity with, in the Middle Ages with the scholastic theologians, famous thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, trying to figure out what a just price was. And you'll learn that if you come back for lecture 3 in this series, where I get into biblical economics. And there's also a school in Spain, a school of thought called the Salamanca School, from the city of Salamanca, where they kind of anticipated some of modern economics, but it didn't really take hold. The birth of modern economics, and even though there are widely divergent opinions about economics, some people are in favor of free markets, some people are in favor of central planning, and a whole lot of shades of difference in between, but we all agree that modern economics can be traced to the publication of a book called An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, or more briefly, The Wealth of Nations, by Adam Smith. And who is Adam Smith? Well, I'll tell you what, he was not an economist, because still, as recently as 1776, there was no such thing as an economist. Economics had not split off from political economy. It had not yet become its own area of study. Adam Smith was a moral philosopher, and a very, very good one. In 1759, he published a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. I absolutely love that book. I think it's every bit as important as The Wealth of Nations. And if you want to get a flavor for it, I wrote a review that it's in the archives for Institute for Faith and Freedom. If you do Google Faith and Freedom, my name, and The Theory of Moral Sentiments, it should show up. In 2009, which happened to be the 250th anniversary of the publication of that book, I wrote a book review of it, so to speak. So I'd recommend it. I mean, it's very helpful to understand Smith's ideas. But the book that pertains most directly to economics came out in 1776. What a momentous year for publishing that was. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, the historian Edward Gibbon's first installment of The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and then this majestic book about economics, The Wealth of Nations. Now, he didn't call it economics, but he pioneered a discussion of a lot of the fundamental concepts that are basic to economics even today. Smith was an astute observer of the human scene, and he wrote with great clarity and common sense. He could see how the world worked. And so he dealt a lot with the basic concept of the division of labor. The fact that because human beings specialize in tasks where they can develop exceptional skill and leave other tasks to other people who will become specialized in those skills, the total skill pool of the society increases and the wealth produced increases. Very fundamental concept and very important. He's also known for the metaphor or the imagery of the invisible hand. He understood that when it comes to the production of wealth, it wasn't necessary for government or any sort of political power to micromanage, to dictate to people what to do. Leave them alone and let them figure it out for themselves. And how are they going to figure out what to do? Well, that's where prices come in. Prices have a very practical function. They're like traffic signals. You know, if the price is too high, oh, no, I'm not going there. On the other hand, if you like the price, yeah, boom, that's where I'm going. And so that gives shape to labor markets as well as the market for all sorts of goods and services. So that was Adam Smith also. He was very big on trade. He also was an advocate of light taxation. He understood how taxation can suppress economic activity. And this is something that some of our politicians kind of wrestle with today. They have these grandiose ambitions about what they want to spend, but it's always expensive. And so they're always looking for new sources of tax revenue. And if they overdo it by raising taxes on various forms of production, they end up impeding production and making a society poorer. Smith said, hey, you've got to stay off the people's back. Let them produce, let them get rich, let them find their own way economically. And some of the other, Smith is known as the founder or the father of the classical school of economics. This is the golden era where economics really starts to take on an identity of its own. And one of his peers was a Frenchman, Jean-Baptiste Say, S-A-Y, like our verb, Say, who's known for Say's law, which is a common sense law that basically, guess what? You have to produce something before you can consume it. In other words, you have to, supply comes first, then demand is possible. That might not sound very remarkable today, but the dominant school of economics in the 20th century reversed Say's law and caused a lot of problems as a result. And I'll maybe come back to that later. Another prominent member of the classical school of economics came a little bit after. He overlapped with Smith, was younger, and Smith died in, I think it was 1792. This man, David Ricardo, was the equivalent back then of a millionaire. He was very successful in investing and became a member of parliament, but also wrote some classical texts in economics. And he's known for the iron law of wages, which is a very grim doctrine. It held that the working class would never be able to climb above a subsistence level of existence. Their wages would always remain poor. He was obviously, and thankfully, spectacularly wrong. But that was the general consensus back then, because there had never, ever in the history of the world been widespread prosperity. Wealth had always been concentrated in the hands of a political elite in societies around the world, or in some of the Pacific Island nations. Maybe there wasn't a whole lot of wealth, but there was, everybody would just kind of lollygagged on the beaches together, and, nature was bountiful enough where they could live a comfortable subsistence living. But in Europe, it was very grim. Ricardo was also known for the, well, this one's slipping my mind here for a minute. It was pioneered by a guy named Torrance. The law of comparative advantage. It's been a few years since I've been in the classroom, so please excuse me if occasionally I stumble and have to fish for a term. But the law of comparative advantage was really important for contributing to the promotion of trade and the increase of trade. The more you trade, the more people you trade with, the more extensive becomes that social division of labor, the labor, that we talked about before, the division of labor. The more specialized labor becomes and the greater wealth there is. And so the law of comparative advantage can actually prove mathematically that it makes the most sense, and this is, human societies don't always act in accord with what makes the most sense, but logically you can demonstrate that the ideal maximum production is going to be achieved when people specialize in producing those things where they have the greatest comparative advantage to others. They may have an absolute advantage. They may be better in producing A, B, and C than this society over here. But if the gap in A is greater than the gaps in the others, they should specialize in A and let this other society that isn't as good as producing B and C, that's not quite as productive, but let them focus on that, because the overall net gain to wealth is going to be greatest when people produce where they have the greatest comparative advantage. So the early decades of the economics movement, starting in 1776, went on up until the 1870s, which was a time of growing prosperity. Just a generation or two after Ricardo passed away, the iron law of wages was shown to be a myth, because standards of living were starting to rise even for the working class. By the way, in the history of economics, in the 1820s, it was in 1825 at Oxford University in England that the first chair in economics came into existence. So the work of Smith and the other classical economists did, in fact, provide the critical masses, as it were, that was needed to make economics a discipline of its own. So there was a classical economist named Nassau, like the island, Nassau Senior, who was the first true economist by name, although economic theorizing had been going on. But finally, economics splits off from political economy and becomes a discipline of its own. So you can see that compared to so many other disciplines, economics is quite young. Now, as great as the classical economists were, there was a huge fundamental theoretical error in their thinking. They never really understood what value is. And you might say, well, how can you understand economics without understanding value? And I agree with you. It would be like trying to mess around with biology, but not really understanding cell structure, or being involved with chemistry, but never really figuring out what valences are. I don't know if you remember valences from high school chemistry. That was a tough course. So the classical economists made some statements, including Smith, made some statements that made it sound that labor was an objective value, that you could assign an objective number to it. And wouldn't you know, Karl Marx, of all people, seized upon that, and he developed the labor theory of value. And he was able to point to classical economists' writings, these people who, for the most part, believed in free markets and minimal government. But Marx pointed to their writings. Look, even the classical economists say that, hey, value is this quantity, and it boils down to the worth of something, the economic value of something, boils down to how many hours of labor were put into it. Now, common sense will teach us that that's not the case. For example, a mining company could spend a huge sum of money to get 100 ounces of gold out of the ground. 100 ounces of gold that's already been produced, and it falls off a carriage being taken to a bank somewhere, and some guy comes along the road and he just finds it there. It's like, he didn't, it's worth just as much. I mean, even though he didn't work for it at all. So this whole thing of value it was exploded in the 1870s with the emergence of what we call today the neoclassical school, or actually more correctly, the neoclassical schools of economics, because there were actually three thinkers in different countries that pretty much arrived at the same conclusion at the same time, totally independent of each other. There was an Englishman named William Stanley Jevons. There was a Swiss fellow by the name of Leon Walras, and there was an Austrian by the name of Karl Menger. And they all understood that value had something to do with what they called the marginal utility. This was the neoclassical schools are sometimes known as the marginal utility revolution. It's the idea that value isn't fixed, but in the marketplace, it's determined, well, what's the value of one more unit? In other words, You're hungry, you buy a pizza. Oh boy, the marginal value of that first slice of pizza is pretty high because you're starved and you eat it. And then for the second, it might not be quite as high, but you still value, you eat it. But after 4 or 5 pieces, all of a sudden, the prospect of eating an additional piece of pizza isn't going to be worth too much to you. It's marginal value. The value of consuming one more piece of pizza has fallen quite a bit. So what happened to value? I mean, it's the same pizza, right? Or one illustration I used to use in the classroom teaching Econ 101, I don't know if you can see this ring here. The lighting's a little bit funny here today. This is jade from China. The uncle who raised me bought this ring in China in the mid-1920s. Well, then World War II and communism happened. Mao Zedong took over. And for decades, you couldn't get this super green Chinese jade. It was essentially priceless on the marketplace. But I would ask students, okay, what's this worth? And, what's its value? There's no right answer. One person said nothing. They don't like rings. Another person might say $10. I don't really like green, but it's kind of okay. Others might say, oh yeah, I know how rare that jade is. They give a higher amount. Now for me, because Pop he took this ring off his finger and gave it to me for Christmas when I was 16 years old. What do you think the value is to me? Value is not just commercial. It can, the old cliche about sentimental value, but that counts. That's still value. And so there's no way to say what the specific value of anything is. It changes. And it changes within the same person, depending on the time. How many of you have ever had a garage sale? You take a lot of stuff that you paid 20, 30, 40, 50, $100 for, and you're out there selling it for 25 cents, or, if it's more expensive, I hope you get $5 or something like that for it. Same piece of equipment, same item, but not the same value to you. So this gave rise to Carl Menger. He was the Austrian in the group. Carl Menger's subjective theory of value. The idea that value is not a quality inherent in an object. I mean, inherent qualities are like, how much does it weigh? What size is it? What color is it? Etc. Those are objective qualities. Value is subjective. It's different for each of us, and it can be different for each one of us as individuals, depending on the time and the situation. And that was a radical breakthrough, and it exploded Marx's labor theory of value. Marx said, well, the poor worker, he's creating all the value. No, the value is what the person who might buy it says it is. Just as beauty is in the eye of the beholder, how do you account for the different tastes in music or movies or books or whatever? Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Value is in the eye of the beholder. Entrepreneurs in a market economy search for things, meaning goods or services, to provide to people that they will value. And sometimes they succeed in providing what people value, and sometimes they don't. But the value is subjective. By the way, Menger and the Austrian school, they were becoming predominant up until World War I. And then World War I happened, and guess who lost? Germany. And Austria is a German language country. And all of a sudden, British and American thinkers lost their interest in ideas coming out of the German-speaking world. It's a shame because they threw the baby out with the bathwater. The Austrian school started falling into the background. One of its differences between the other neoclassical schools is that the Austrian school is sometimes described as the verbal school. It's not heavy with charts and formulas or anything like that. Walras, the Swiss fellow who discovered marginal utility at the same time as Menger and Jevons, Walras was a mathematician. And so his school, which is called the Lausanne School after the city of Lausanne in Switzerland, they're mathematically oriented. And you see that influence in a lot of economic literature today. In England, Jevons was succeeded by a guy named Alfred Marshall, who was an engineer. And so the English tradition of economics became sort of this view of the economy as a machine, and the economists and the politicians would figure out how to tweak the machine. And of course, that ignores the fact that Menger discovered that the key actor is the individual, because it's only in the individual mind where value exists. So along with the subjective theory of value, the Austrian school is known for its methodological individualism, which is just fancy academic jargon saying, if you really want to understand economics, look at what people do. You know, it's the individual that makes all the difference in the world there. Well, the Austrian school, although it suffered quite a setback there, just thought of something I want to tell you. Karl Menger, the founder of the Austrian school, was a visionary, really a genius. His book, The Principle of Economics, is just it was so unlike anything that had been written up until that time. And it's so clear. You can understand it with common sense. But he also had this ability to understand social movements, currents of thought. He could see where things were going. He could see that the old order, you know, with the monarchies that had dominated Europe for centuries, was not long for this world. In fact, he was the tutor to the crown prince, Rudolf, who was the heir apparent to the Austrian throne, or the remnants of the Holy Roman Empire. And unfortunately, as he tutored the young man and told him what he saw coming, the young man was filled with great despair. You know, Menger essentially saw the convulsions of World War I. He saw that the old order was going to crumble and pass away. He saw that the transition would be violent. There would be a lot of social upheaval. And Crown Prince Rudolf took that to heart, and combined with the fact that his father, the emperor, did not approve of his choice of a marriage partner, he committed suicide, which meant that his brother, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, then became the heir apparent. And if that name rings a bell, of course, it was because when Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo in 1914, that was the event that precipitated the Great War, World War I. That we might have never heard of Franz Ferdinand had his older brother Rudolf not taken his own life. And I'm not trying to blame Karl Menger for doing that, but there is that connection there. And it was a testament, so to speak, of Menger's visionary abilities. Well, Menger was not the only genius in the Austrian tradition. A very bright man named Bumbawerk, Eugen von Bumbawerk, apologize, I don't speak German, so I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but he was the finance minister of the Austrian Empire there toward its end. He was even on the Austrian currency. And then he had a student who's really the star of the show, Ludwig von Mises. Mises is spelled M-I-S-E-S. It rhymes with Jesus, it's Mises. Mises was absolutely a genius. And first, as a young economist, he integrated money into the general theory of economics. Because remember, economics is very undeveloped and there are all sorts of loose ends. But here's where Mises really becomes a superstar. In 1920, he publishes an essay explaining why socialism could not work. He wasn't making a prediction. He was explaining with scientific logic that socialism literally could not work. Not that it just would not work, but that it could not work. And why? And by the way, he developed that into a book of 600 pages. I remember when I first read it, I learned more from reading that one book than I did in 4 years of undergraduate education. I didn't go to Grove City, by the way, so, you know, but there are schools where you're being taught things you don't really need and not being taught things that you really do need. And I think one of the things we all need today is an understanding of the dangers of socialism. why people continue to be fascinated with a system that never has worked. I mean, wherever they've experimented with it, it's been a disaster. But if we had just read Mises, and again, remember, in the post-World War I era, who wants to read these German language folks? Fortunately, Mises, who was Jewish, later fled to Switzerland and then fled from Switzerland to the United States in the late 30s to escape Hitler, and started writing in the English language in his 50s and published more books here. And I'll tell you about one of those in a minute. But let me explain his great theoretical breakthrough. I think it's the greatest achievement in the field of economics in the 20th century, and maybe for all time, but at least in the 20th century. The reason socialism can't work is because of its fundamental rejection of private property. I call them the three Ps, the three essentials for the working of a market economy, which leads to prosperity, a market economy being a free market, as opposed to socialism, which is a centrally planned, by the government elite, a centrally planned pseudo market. It's not really a market. It's just a few people at the top, an elite dictating what should be produced and what the prices should be, and so on and so forth. A market economy, by contrast, works entirely on the basis of private property, which empowers each individual to make decisions about what to buy or sell, what to produce or not produce, to follow those price signals that I referred to earlier. Because you have a title, nobody can take your property without your permission. But they can entice you to surrender your property if they pay the right price. And what is the right price? Well, you have to value what they're giving you more than what you have. But the only reason they're offering that to you is because they value what you have more than the price they're offering. That's called a positive sum transaction, which replaced the gloomy worldview that prevailed for centuries, that the world economy was a zero-sum place, that if one person gained, another person would lose. The 16th century French philosopher Michel de Montaigne it was called the Montaigne dogma. And he came around with an essay and he said, if one person profits, it's because somebody else loses. No. In a free market, exchanges only happen when there's mutual benefit. I mean, if you're free, why would you ever give something to somebody else that's worth more to you than what you're getting? You wouldn't do that. That would be self-destructive. But you don't have to, because it's your property. Private property protects you. It puts you in a position where the only time you give up your property voluntarily to somebody else is if they're compensating you by providing something you value even more. And it holds true for the other party to the transaction. So you have a reciprocal mutual benefit. Fantastic breakthrough theoretically. And because of this nature of private property, where it can only be, you're only willing to have it part from you at the right price, that's how market prices get determined. It's all a bunch of negotiation between potential buyers and potential sellers. I'll give you this much, no, but I'll give you this much. And eventually prices emerge. And those prices are economically meaningful. They really do reflect what people value. They are signals to entrepreneurs, hey, you want to make a buck? Produce more of this. You can see that's where the demand is. You can tell the demand by the price. Over here, people aren't selling what they're selling. Don't produce more of that. That's a waste of time. And so prices, market-based prices, economically rational prices based on real-time conditions of supply and demand, basically coordinate production and allocate scarce resources. They're signals to where the different resources are valued most. And so we use this mechanism of price as our economic language for how we communicate with each other. And so we figure out, entrepreneurs figure out what to produce, and that's how wealth gets maximized. Plus, the prices are then used for the third P. Okay, there's private property, P number 1, prices, P number 2, profits, P number 3. And of course, to a Marxist or something, a profit is a dirty word. But to an economist, it's an enlightened word. It's a benevolent word. You measure your profits by, an entrepreneur will say, okay, he puts $100 worth of resources, of factors of production, land, labor, and capital into producing a good or service. If he's able to market that to others, if others are willing to pay a total of $120 for that, then he has, through economic alchemy, you might say, through entrepreneurial genius, really. The entrepreneur has taken assets worth 100 and lo and behold, converted them into something worth 120. That's a net increase of wealth for society. And that, of course, represents the entrepreneur's profit. And it's not at the expense of the people buying his good or service. Because if they weren't profiting from it, they wouldn't have bought it. You know, these people that get hung up on, oh, this corporation makes obscene profits. There is no such thing as an obscene profit in a free market. They make exorbitant or ginormous profits because they're creating humongous value for large numbers of people. Both sides are benefiting. Both sides are being enriched. We should want more and more companies to make mega profits because it means society is getting richer and richer and richer. And that ability to measure profits is crucial because guess what? Not every entrepreneur is able to take goods that are worth 20 and convert them into goods worth 120. Some of them take goods worth 100 and the next thing you know, they can only sell them for 60, 70, or 80. Not every business venture is a success. Some are money losers. And when your prices represent true economic value, a money loser is another word for a value destroyer. Companies that lose money are actually diminishing the wealth of society. That's not socially beneficial. And yet under socialism, those enterprises are subsidized by the government and kept operating. You see, under socialism, where you don't have private property, prices are totally arbitrary. They're just assigned. My late friend Yuri Maltsev once worked in the price bureau in Russia, in the Soviet Union. There were 328, I think it was, bureaucrats. He was one of them. And they were in charge of setting 23 million consumer prices across that vast land expanse of the Soviet Union, because prices were different in different communities, and there were price for this, price for that, price for that. Think of that logistically. I mean, you can't even revisit these prices but every few years. There's no adjustment as there is in a free market where adjustments can take place overnight. Look at your stock market. Prices adjust by the minute, by the second. In a Soviet or a socialist economy, prices are stuck at the same level for years. They're rigid. Moreover, because those prices are fictions, you know, they really don't represent what people value, they're useless for calculating profit and loss. Literally, any Soviet enterprise, the planners, the elite, the government, they had no way to tell whether any particular enterprise was increasing value for society, in other words, uplifting standards of living, or making it worse. Because they had no private property, which meant they had no meaningful prices, which meant they could not calculate profit and loss. And the calculation of profit and loss is the essential economic function of prices. It lets us know if we're on the right track for more prosperity or veering off track toward less economic prosperity. The Soviets were flying blind. Every centrally planned economy where you have the government saying, produce this, produce this, produce this, and then figuring out prices later, it's the same problem. You do not have rational economic calculation. Therefore, you don't know if you're getting richer or poorer. You don't know if you're increasing the value of resources or decreasing it. And usually you're decreasing it. But because as a socialist government, you've promised everybody, hey, we'll guarantee your job. So they will keep these firms in operation for decades, even as the society just keeps getting poorer and poorer and poorer, and they can't figure out why. It's because what they're dictating to be produced isn't what the people want. Well, Mises not only made that magnificent discovery about the unviability of socialism, he eventually developed a comprehensive theory of human action. We call it praxeology, but his magnum opus, his biggest book, is called Human Action. How do humans act? That's the basic starting point of economics, how we act. And we act differently from other species. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie The March of the Penguins. It's a wonderful documentary showing the way the penguins cope year after year with the brutal cold of Antarctica. And it followed their annual rituals. But what strikes you when you watch that movie about the penguins is you realize the penguins have no choice. You know, they're automatons. They're pre-programmed by nature, by instinct. This is what you do at this time of year. This is what you boom, 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 boom. They don't really have a choice. Humans do have a choice. You know, the college student, he has a choice every evening. Am I going to hang out with my buddies? Am I going to watch a movie? Am I going to hit the books? You have choices every day too. What to have for breakfast or at work. Which of these tasks should I do first? We're always making choices. And the rational human being makes the choice for what they value more over what they value less. Like if they're choosing what to do at work first, they think, well, this will help me get through the day. Let me get this out of the way, and then the other stuff won't seem so daunting or whatever. We're constantly, not really conscious of it, but whether we realize it or not, we're making decisions all the time. But we're making them not randomly, we're making them rationally. We choose, to put it in economic terms, we choose what we value more over what we value less. You can see that in action every time you go to the grocery store. You pick out what you value more and leave the other stuff. Go to shopping malls, same thing. This is the wonder of human action. Now, do people always do what's best for them? No, we've got flaws in the human psyche. Sometimes people get caught up in self-destructive behavior. Maybe that's the field for the psychologist to examine. But the economist can make the simple statement that people act by choosing what they value more over what they value less. If what they value more happens to be counterproductive or self-destructive or whatever, well, another field of academic discipline can try to figure out why they value it more. But the fact is they do value it more, and that's proved because that's what they choose to do. Their action confirms their scale of value, or illustrates their scale of values. I mean, Mises' theoretical breakthrough there was just magnificent, a comprehensive theory of human action. But again, he wasn't popular. You know, we had the 1930s in this country with the Roosevelt New Deal, which really started under Herbert Hoover. So let me call it the Hoover FDR New Deal. Huge expansion of government throughout the 30s. Massive economic stagnation throughout the 30s. No coincidence, cause and effect. Government kept interrupting the free market, interfering with the free market, infringing on property rights, dictating and controlling economic behavior, not letting the people alone. You know, the arrogance of the government planner, whether it be a socialist or a welfare statist or whatever you want to call it, is they think they know what's best for everyone else. But I can guarantee you, even if somebody has 6 doctorates and is a genius and has the heart of a saint. They still don't know what Joe Lunchbucket with an 8th grade education wants today and tomorrow, as well as Joe Lunchbucket knows. You know, the problem with the socialist central planners is they exclude most of human intelligence from their calculations. They don't care what the masses of people want. They've got their own ideas. We see it in our country today with the Green New Deal. And you're going to see a lot of economic pain as a result of those interventions. You know, I'm going to share with you another term that Mises gave us. He referred to a market economy as consumer sovereignty. That's an excellent way of putting it. The consumer decides which businesses prosper, maybe which entrepreneurs get rich, and which don't. Because again, the consumer, controlling his own property, his own wealth, only buys something when he's getting value for it, when he's getting more value from what he's buying than what he's giving up in terms of money. And those decisions by millions of consumers give the thumbs up or the thumbs downs to the various businesses. The only way for an entrepreneur or a business to succeed, by that I mean to make a lot of sales and make profits, to get rich in a market economy, is to find out what that consumer wants and give it to them at a better price and with better quality than your competition. The consumer is in the catbird seat. Everybody's trying to please him. And that's how a society gets wealthier, by entrepreneurs producing what people value the most. And the price signals in a private property order, which is what my mentor Hans Sennholz called the free market, that's how we find out who the winners and losers are. I mentioned Dr. Sennholz. Okay, Mises came to the United States, never was given a full professorship in economics. His work back in the old world was in the Austrian Chamber of Commerce. Never much in academia, but he did have 4 students that he guided through the PhD program at New York University for doctorates in economics. And the first of those 4 was Hans Sennholz. And for those of you who probably have heard the name, if you're not quite sure who he is, Hans was handpicked by J. Howard Pugh, chairman of the board of trustees of Grove City College in 1955, to come to Grove City and teach free market economics, to teach Austrian economics. And Hans, of course, became a Grove City College legend. He was the chairman of the economics department for 37 years before he retired in 1992. He also was my mentor. This leads to a cute story. One of the absolute highlights of my years teaching at Grove City College was in 2011. We had Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, on campus for a visit. I happened to walk into the room where there was going to be a luncheon for him. He was in there all by himself. I was there early. It was just the 2 of us. An amazingly friendly, straightforward fellow. I mean, I just admire him greatly. I like him greatly. Asked what I did. I said, well, I teach economics. First thing he says is, oh, do you know Ludwig von Mises? So there you go. I mean, even though the Austrian school is not the dominant school in the political realm today, there's a lot of smart people who are familiar with the ideas of Ludwig von Mises, including Justice Thomas. And of course, I proudly said, well, yes, he's my grandfather. He taught Sennholz, and Sennholz taught me. I never had the privilege of meeting Professor Mises, but I owe, a considerable debt to him. And, that tradition does live on at Grove City College. One of my students, Caleb Fuller, is now, on the economics faculty at Grove City College. So the tradition continues. And this is important. What people don't realize is that it's easy today to take for granted, oh yeah, Grove City College, free market economics. The reason J. Howard Pugh went to such efforts to get Dr. Senholz, a pure Austrian economist, to come to Grove City College was because in the 50s, there were a lot of leftist ideas at Grove City, as was the case throughout the country. Free market economics had almost become extinct. And why? Because the fashion, the rage of popularity in the 20th century was the Keynesian school of economics, named after the British economist John Maynard Keynes, who came out of the neoclassical British tradition, kind of an engineering sort of outlook. And Keynes viewed the economy, he invented the term macroeconomics, and government policy should impact this part of the economy and do that for that economy, as if the economy was a big machine, ignoring that what really matters is at the micro level, the individual decisions that get made. And of course, public policy does affect individual decisions. You tax people too highly, and guess what? Your tax revenues go down instead of up, because people move their money to places where it's not going to get appropriated at such a high rate. Keynes, Mises was so scientific, the way he logically proved that socialism couldn't work. And he insisted, and some people get mad at him, that he eschewed a value approach, that our values should influence our economic policies. Yeah, I mean, Mises said, look, we're human beings. Of course we have values, but economics as a science is value free. It's the study of, if you do A, then the likely consequence is this for this reason. I mean, there's an inherent logic in these different economic steps. John Maynard Keynes, by contrast, was a mysticist. Did I say that right? He had a mythology. One of his articles, this is going to blow you away, I think. In the 1940s, he wrote an article that we have solved the miracle of turning stones into bread. Whoa, that's a pretty lofty claim. It's not a true claim. What he was referring to was this notion that somehow, if government just spent more money, and you had to go into greater debt to do it, that this would call forth all sorts of new production. Well, it can. I mean, you give me $1 billion to spend, and I can create some jobs for some people. But what you're not looking at are the jobs that are no longer available because of what's been taxed to fund this government program. But Keynes's ideas were a total reversal of Say's law. Remember, Adam Smith had that French contemporary, Jean-Baptiste Say. You have to, first comes supply, then comes demand. Keynes turned that totally on its ear. He said, first increase demand, and then supply will catch up. But that supply is not economically rational. It's not based on market prices. It's just based on what the government thinks should be produced. It's sort of central planning light. It's a halfway house to socialism. In fact, much of our government today is a halfway house to socialism. Look at all the federal bureaucracies we have. Mises, by the way, wrote a fantastic book explaining the dynamics of bureaucracies. About 140 pages. You can find it free online. I think Mises.org, the Ludwig von Mises Institute, makes it available for free if you ever want to look at it. But bureaucracies are inherently inefficient because they operate outside of the marketplace. They're just given money by the political authorities and say, take care of this task. And then we read these stories. There was one in the headline today about 10% of, so many federal welfare programs, I can't remember which one this was, if it had to do with food or unemployment or whatever, but 10% of the payments were in error. Well, that's bureaucracy. You've heard legendary stories about the Pentagon and its inefficiencies. And I agree, the Pentagon's inefficient. It's inherently inefficient because it's a bureaucracy. Now, unlike the folks on the left that say do away with the Pentagon, I would say, look, it may be inefficient, but you can't do away with national defense. But because bureaucracies are wasteful, even a wealthy country like the United States cannot afford too many bureaucracies. And now we've got bureaucracies, with education and energy and transportation, commerce and agriculture. And we wonder why we're $32 trillion in debt. And it is semi-socialistic. What is socialism but a government by bureaucracies? Yes, at the top you have your central planners, your political elite, your Xi Jinping and the earlier ones, Stalin and whatever. But most of the day-to-day administration of the wishes of the great leader are carried out by bureaucracies. Well, we're getting dangerously close to that socialistic. Socialism is a system of government by bureaucracy. The United States still has a market economy, but we're veering dangerously close to excessive bureaucracy here. Okay. Let me just kind of close with a couple of thoughts. You'll have people still condemn capitalism. Capitalism is not an ideal system. There's no such thing as heaven on earth. We all wish there were. There isn't. But capitalism does so much more to uplift standards of living. And a lot of this is because of the science of economics. In the 1800s, because of the iron law of wages, a lot of people called economics the dismal science, because economic theory made it sound like the masses would always be poor. Well, that error has been exploded. It's been shown to be false. And we've got widespread wealth. But it didn't happen instantly. Each generation got wealthier, and some people got wealthier before others. There was a lot of strife in the so-called Gilded Age, the late 1800s in the United States, because there were some people getting very, very rich, while workers were working long and sometimes dangerous hours for a relative pittance. What you had there, though, it wasn't necessarily human viciousness or greed. It was the inexorable economic law of supply and demand. Literally, the problem was that it wasn't that there were capitalists exploiting labor. It's that there were not enough capitalists exploiting labor. But as more and more fortunes developed, and the banking system and the investing infrastructure grew so that more and more entrepreneurs can receive financing, more and more businesses come into existence, and all of a sudden the shift between the balance of supply and demand made it so that things were working in the favor of the worker instead of against them. There was a time when there was just an oversupply of labor, and they got paid poorly as a result. The laws of economics are pretty firm, and they can be unforgiving. And there are a lot of growing pains on our road to prosperity. But now we've got widespread wealth, and we've got so many opportunities for people to make money these days. The law of supply and demand has come to the rescue of the worker. I'll just close by saying, the science of economics, it's still not reaching its potential. I think it's been co-opted. Let me put it this way. A large percentage of economists have been co-opted from just teaching economic truth to playing games with the government. They're the witch doctors, so to speak, that provide an intellectual justification for all sorts of ambitious government spending programs. That's not true economics. However, the success and the popularity of and the fame of John Maynard Keynes did that to the economics profession. People said, oh, presidents say he's doing good work. They're giving him awards by advising government to expand and to increase government spending. Well, I guess I'll advise government people to increase government spending, which takes us away from the free market, which does away with consumer sovereignty, which undermines the private property order, capitalism. So that's the main activity, I think, of economists today. Others make a living playing soothsayer. They pretend they can predict the future, and you can get rich following their advice. Tread carefully there, friends. It doesn't always work that way. And then you have people called economists, but they're really just statisticians and paper shufflers in the federal bureaucracy, accumulating a lot of data. But the great privilege of a true economist is to be a truth teller. That's what Dr. Semholtz always drilled into me. Tell the truth. And we do that through our writings, we do that through our lectures, through our classrooms. And this is what's going on at Grove City College. And I thank you all for your friendship and support for Grove City College. And I'll see you at the next lecture. Bye-bye.